I have always thought of my wife as the dearest of people, someone you could rely on and trust, but what a disappointment it was when my wife chose a very nasty path and faced the consequences that came with it. I had hoped to receive my prize money tonight, but I was skeptical about receiving it for the first time in 3 years. This is one of the most important social gatherings of the year in our small Midwestern town, with almost all the notables in attendance. My company had purchased a table for the event, and my wife and I were both attending. I thought my wife was at the peak of her beauty as she came down the stairs fully dressed, her lovely red hair neatly coiled around her head and dangling gold earrings accentuating her graceful neck. I had expected her to choose a gown, but her gown accentuated her charms, and oh look at me, I couldn't help but marvel at her, for I knew deep down that all other men would be bowled over by her beauty. I don't mind people admiring my wife, but it's important for her to remember that I don't share what belongs to me with others. As a high school teacher, Hester seemed to mingle easily with the city's elite, and her opportunities to deal with people were limited, but she had a natural charm that could effortlessly attract others, and her talent and charisma drew in those around her like ants at a picnic. It turned out to be U.S. Senator Thomas Norberto, who looked like the Hispanic counterpart of Tom Selikin, sharpshooter P.I., a very good-looking, single, lanky man who stood about 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 220 pounds, and was being touted to run in the upcoming presidential race. I decided to take matters into my own hands as none of them seemed to notice my presence. "Excuse me, Senator, that's my seat." I waited quietly for about 5 seconds and then dropped my jovial demeanor. I interrupted their conversation by placing a glass of wine in the middle of their faces and then placed her glass of wine on the table in front of her as I stood in the middle of them with my wine almost directly in front of them. "On the other hand," she said, "you were rather rude to a U.S. Senator, and you seem to have forgotten that you are my wife, not his, and it was rather rude and intemperate of him to take my seat and not move, even though he thinks he is the next president." I avoided escalating the situation in front of our company when she winked at me. She responded with a but didn't say anything else. I got up from my seat and offered her my hand, but she angrily declined. She shook her head and gave me a disappointed look. I wasn't naive, so when he didn't return to the table after another 10 minutes, I decided to check out the balcony. I approached them and started to yank the senator's arm away, but someone grabbed my arm and twisted it so hard that it drew attention to the fact that no one messes with a U.S. senator. I asked him to take my wife away unless he wanted me to make a scene, damn it. He muttered in a small voice as he turned to face the senator. I grabbed her hand and nearly yanked her out of the ballroom, and I stayed silent the rest of the way home, but I knew the silence wouldn't last long. For whatever reason, he seemed to think the best defense was a solid offense. I thought Hester and I had a good marriage, that we had our ups and downs like any other couple, that you were possessive, that you realized you'd crossed the line, that you didn't even try to break away from his embrace, that you acted like a teenage girl obsessed with him, that she blushed, stammered, but ultimately stayed silent, that when she bowed her head I knew I'd spoken to her, that she must have been attracted to this man. But on Wednesday night, after the kids were in bed, he said we needed to talk, not just talk, not a recommendation, but a need. In fact, it wasn't even a date, I was just going to another fundraising dinner with him. When I questioned the appropriateness of a married woman dating a man who is not her spouse, Hess responded, "It definitely sounds like a date to me." I countered that if you accompany him, it means you're his date and you're married and your horizons are limited. She said I would never betray you. She quirked her mouth, made a face, and glared at me with her signature squint. I knew that mentioning her charming acquaintance would get her attention, and she definitely had a problem with Angie, who, in the words of the Rolling Stones, could bring the dead back to life. She argued that dating a U.S. senator was not the same as dating, and obviously there was a big difference. "Listen, Hess, you can't date anyone else, no matter what you say, we're married, we took vows, remember." "Despite the fact that we're married," she replied, "if I really wanted to do something, I could and would do it. I'm not your property. That's what happens when you marry a crossword puzzle enthusiast. Of course you're not my property, but you're the mother of my children, and I don't want you to break up our family," I pleaded, and her eyes widened. Again she grimaced, but remained mute. I wasn't expecting this, and I was stunned when Hester came downstairs fully dressed for a Friday night date. She was wearing a form-fitting strapless white lace gown that emphasized her curvy figure and showed off a huge chunk of her massive breasts. I had never seen the dress before and assumed she had bought it especially for the occasion. At that moment our children rushed into the room and stopped in their tracks when they saw Hester. "Mommy, you look like a princess," 7-year-old Elise exclaimed. "Why are you dressed like that?" But I was dumbfounded and just stared at my wife. "I can't tell her," Hester stammered. "You can't tell her because you know it's wrong." Hester explained that you have to be nice to Daddy. I'll see you in the morning. Why doesn't Daddy come with you?" Both children looked at Hess with shocked and pained eyes, and she looked at me with the same look, and I said, "Will the truth sting us?" The doorbell interrupted our conversation and we all froze for a short while before it rang again. I saw a black limousine pull up in the driveway. "Remember to listen to your dad. She said she'd see you in the morning," and left. I wanted to drown my sorrows in the liquor cabinet, but that wasn't going to happen. I was going to make a couple FaceTime calls, one to my parents and one to hers. After all, kids like to talk to their grandparents on FaceTime. I spoke to Hester's parents first. We've always had a good relationship and I thought Hester's recent antics would upset them. We laughed and laughed for a while before Hester's mother noticed she wasn't picking up the phone. "Where's my daughter Reggie?" "No ma'am, Hester has gone on a date with Senator Thomas Norberto. I expect her back tomorrow." I whispered, "What is this date my mother-in-law has announced?" I tried to reason with her father, but she insisted that I could not control her, to which I replied that I had told her that if she continued to do so she would neglect her family, but she seemed to think it a pardonable offense. She advised my wife not to make rash or unwise decisions, to communicate with her properly, not to simply abandon her as she did when she walked out of the house, and to think of the children. "Mom." When I called my parents to explain what had happened, my mother-in-law coughed weakly on the other end of the line. My mother wasn't all that sympathetic. I knew a great attorney who was a wonderful sweetheart. She made a direct offer that she was representing Aunt Lane in her divorce from Uncle Will. She totally outwitted Will's attorney, which of course helped. After a few phone calls I decided to order a pizza. The kids watched the Disney movie of their choice, but I have no idea which one. When the kids woke up I prepared a pancake and bacon feast, and everyone knows pancakes taste better with bacon, even if Mom isn't home in the morning. They ask me when Mom will be back, and I reply that she'll be back soon, and even if that's not true, I guess there's no reason to rush home after a long night with a man who isn't your husband. Our kids are playing in the yard, and the rest of the neighborhood. The car arrives, and the kids usually rush to see their mother. Her hair is loose around her shoulders, and she's not wearing any makeup. When she arrived at the house, I was already away from the window, sitting in a chair in the living room. She seemed tired as she walked in. "Hey," she greeted me, "it looks like you and the kids made it through the night without me." "It looks like you barely made it through," I said hurriedly, as she walked wearily toward the stairs. "Don't start, Rich, let me take a nap and a shower. Right now I just want to know how to make my kids' lives as easy as possible. I don't want to be that father who only sees his kids on the weekends, and the question in my head is whether I'm going to be able to hold out until they graduate from high school." 0 p.m. I told her there were leftovers in the fridge, and she smiled faintly. The kids, realizing that something was wrong with Hester, kept their distance. "That's great, Reggie. Have you been poisoning their minds all day, turning them against their mom?" There was a flash of shame in her eyes before she adopted a provocative attitude. "I'm not breaking up our family," she retorted. "It's up to you. If you can develop and overcome your ego issues we can heal and sustain our family, but if you insist on being petty and nasty we'll have to go our separate ways and you can be a part-time dad." I didn't anticipate the conversation turning into this. I thought I'd feel regret and remorse instead of resistance and anger. "It's 1 p.m. What about you?" I replied. "You weren't satisfied the night before and you had to spend another half a day." "Hey, it was just a fling, right?" She paused for a second to avoid making eye contact. "We can get over this ridge and get back to the way things were between us." "I hope you're not apologizing. If you are then you suck," I said. "I'm just sorry for hurting you and nothing more." "What are you doing now?" she asked me. "We can't move forward unless you're willing to try." No, I tried to stop you from betraying me before it happened, but it's too late now," I clarified. She looked at me with an expression like she was dealing with a bratty child. "Reggie, we can't turn back time, we need to move forward," she insisted. "Honey, you're right, we can't turn back time, but if you do the right thing and avoided meeting with Sandra, we wouldn't be dealing with all of this. It wasn't my fault that it was the wrong choice for our family, but, as I gently ushered her out of the room and locked the door, I was sound asleep as soon as her words were out of my mouth, most likely due to the fact that I'd been awake for 48 hours straight, and coupled with the tense situation, I'd gotten into the family habit of preparing a nice brunch every Sunday morning, and that day as we ate, I decided to use my high-end waffle maker to prepare Bellin waffles. While Mom and Dad were preparing our hearty breakfast for the 2-day weekend, Hester came out of the master bedroom disheveled as if she hadn't slept a wink. I was lying on the lazy boy couch watching the Chicago Cubs beat the St. Louis Cardinals when I suddenly heard the bedroom door slam open and the doorknob hit the wall. "Jesus, Berber, how could you seduce a simple, virtuous girl?" As she and Nate walked into the room, Elise asked, "What's a Kardashian, Mom?" Upon hearing the commotion, I raised an eyebrow at my wife and met her eager gaze. I replied that it wasn't my fault if they agreed with my assessment of the situation, which by the way, my parents had a similar reaction, so you might want to keep an eye out the next time my mom gets too close. I grumbled as I gestured for her to get out of the way so I could see the TV, and then she scurried out of the room. I slept in the guest room for the next 2 weeks, telling the kids I had a cold and didn't want their mom to catch it. One night, an hour after Hess had gone upstairs, I went back to our shared bed and gently climbed on top of her, and when the alarm went off the next morning, she snuggled up next to me, feeling so good that she mumbled that it was time to come back to her senses, and she tried to touch me. I stopped her by placing my hand on her forearm and pulled her hand away. I adjusted our position so that we were facing each other on the bed. Before I decide to sleep with you again, you must be tested and provide me with the results. I said softly, you can trust the senator, but I won't. Her eyes filled with tears and she seemed to want to say something, but decided against it and just nodded, which made me realize that she and the senator weren't using protection. My once strong feelings for this woman shattered 2 weeks ago, feelings that have been fading ever since I saw her leave her hospital bed with a saddened look on her face. If this image would have broken me before, I would have tried to do everything I could to alleviate her sadness, but now my own pain prevents me from reaching out to her. Who is this woman? This woman I married 9 years ago and have been with for 11 years would surely understand that I would never approve of her dating another man, let alone having sex with someone else. Hester and I met during our senior year of college. We started dating officially 3 months later, and were married less than 2 years later. She worked as an actuary for a national insurance company and was the type of person who silently calculated insurance premiums in her cubicle. When I walked in the door from work, Hester handed me an envelope containing her health certificate. I hope you're satisfied, she whispered coldly. You don't know how humiliating this is. I may never be able to face Dr. Sanger again. She hissed softly but couldn't answer. She started to walk away, but I wasn't finished. How often has Senator Dick contacted you since that day? She understood me. With a wounded scowl, she pulled out her pocket phone and gave it to me. I quickly found what I imagined to be his phone number and found 6 text messages and 2 phone calls associated with it. Despite his attempts to reach out to me, there was no indication they had met again, and her text messages conveyed no encouragement, nor discouragement. Damn it, I sighed, we're treading on thin ice. Yes, if I find out about another date, our children could be orphaned because I'll be sent to jail after I end my relationship with both of you. One night she showed signs of concern for me in bed and my animal instincts took over. I had no feelings for her. I just wanted to be satisfied. I was fully aware that she was trying to win me back, but I didn't care. I was more concerned about something else. A few weeks ago Hessa made a dramatic return to the house, and I couldn't help but think about the gossip from the neighbors. And while no one spoke to me directly, I did notice some of the men casting sympathetic glances and a few women giving forced smiles. Because one night, as I sat on the back porch thinking hard while Hessa watched TV in the living room, Eliza came up to me and asked me, Dad, what's the Women's Easy Virtue Club, and how did Mom join it? The girls claimed that their moms were discussing their moms being members of the Easy Virtue Girls Club and giggled. Dad, I think I'm a pretty good poker player, so I have to use all my skills to keep my expression so it's not obvious that I'm saying to my daughter, Mommy made a mistake recently, but there's something going on between Mommy and Daddy, so don't you worry about it. I hugged her tenderly, hoping she wouldn't see the tears in my eyes, a moment that would stay with me until the day I died. Our home was slowly returning to normal, at least from my perspective. I can't truly trust her anymore, and I can't forgive or forget her contempt for me and our family. Love to quote a song by Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? Before she could say anything, I heard her sob, Reggie, can we talk? She asked timidly. Yes, I exhaled, can you turn around? Her tone of voice when she asked me was clearly annoyed and I sighed, trying to hide her anger. Before I turned around and locked eyes with her, she kept glancing at me. I had a date and I noticed that you satisfied me physically and then you went to sleep. You made sure that I was happy, but the feeling was only physical. You didn't hug me and I missed the intimacy. You can't even say those words, baby. I answered your date. You cheated on me with this man. Admit it. I'm not stupid. You think I didn't notice anything? You made me feel like it was cheap and disgusting. She protested. Yes, we had intimacy Saturday night. It was great. He was gentle and considerate just like you. Really, it was a memorable experience, so we stopped having sex. Yes, didn't you see that? You gave him something you promised. It was exclusive to me. You liked everything. Statistically, that's nothing compared to the hundreds of days we've been married. We can forget about it if you'd like to try. Joe Young is a divorced blonde with an attractive figure. Lives close by. Almost every lady on our street closely follows her interactions with her husband and so on and so forth. Are you implying that you desire Mary Jo? She exclaimed. No way, Pay attention to your inner voice. Yes, I never said I wanted to marry Joe. You did. I was just wondering how you would react if I did. Did you realize that the other girls in the neighborhood were bullying Eliza because of this? They overheard their mothers verbally abusing you. It wasn't easy to take. That's what I said. Her anger was replaced by disbelief at the news. Eliza had never brought it up before. She sucked in her breath and processed everything she'd heard. I'm really sorry. I'm not sorry enough. You described the night as an unforgettable night. It was an unforgettable experience for both of us. I'll never forget your betrayal. That's what I said. And then I turned away and went to bed. Over the next few months Hester worked on being a good mother. Traditionally I was the primary caregiver for the children, but suddenly Hester took on her own responsibilities, taking the children to activities and supporting them enthusiastically. My daughter once again demonstrated a keen insight beyond that of an 8-year-old mom is really trying, Dad. And the other day she said something to me that I hoped that she would get the money for any wrongdoing. She deserved an apology for anything wrong she'd done. Despite her intense desire for perfect normalcy, she enjoyed some of the benefits. She hoped that I would eventually cave in. Somewhere deep down inside I still have fragments of my love for her, but I can't simply delete 9 years of a life centered around her. He seems to be keeping in regular contact while she tries to keep her distance from him, at least for now. Can we make another appointment soon? I'll be in town. He texted me almost a month ago. My husband was still upset about the previous one and she said I couldn't take the chance. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed with her. I replied, can't you just get over that? She pleaded, how often do you two communicate? I asked pointedly, and she had the audacity to giggle before pulling her cell phone out of her pocket and handing it to me, which I tossed high into the air, catching it easily as it fell. I know you've been unfaithful to me, but I also recognize that you're smart. I'm willing to bet that there's no evidence of your affair in the phone since I confiscated it the first time. However, there are old text messages and call logs on the phone that may not have been initiated by you, but I've never heard you explicitly reject the other person. My job and children give me stability, although my coworker often says I seem to need a good night's sleep, even 6 hours. She constantly expressed regret for her daughter's behavior and we apologized to her. Reggie, we didn't raise her to be so selfish, but I really hope you can find a way to work this out. On one occasion when she called to check up on me she said I know what you did for the kids. The weather was perfect, sunny, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and hardly a breeze. The party started a couple hours ago and was expected to last another 5 or 6 hours. I was going to direct them to the family room or living room, since most of the activities took place outside and occasionally someone would bring the sanctuary indoors for a breeze or a calm discussion, but that particular space put me in a dilemma. I was about to enter the room when Hester said something to the guy next to her. I froze, my legs went weak and I almost tripped. Damn, how many people know I'm being lied to? I heard laughter, like there were 3 of them in there. I dumped out the breakfast and lunch I'd eaten the night before, cleaned up, and took the cooler with the beers outside, handed 2 beers to the 2 guys who were working on the grill. Hey, Reg, how are you doing? That night after I put the kids to bed and cleaned up I expressed my displeasure to my wife, who was sitting in her recliner sipping a glass of red wine and looking pleased with herself. She laughed and said, he's a great senator and I couldn't resist sharing him. So first you cheated on me and then you embarrassed me in front of your friends, which means now every husband realizes you were unfaithful and I'm cuckolded. I wasn't unfaithful. I wouldn't put up with people saying that about me. I just got careless. I didn't sleep with strangers in a seedy motel, she shouted with an intense gleam in her eye, her voice rising higher and higher. If you can't let go, that's your own problem. Either file for divorce or accept reality. I'm tired of living a life of lies with you pretending to be Mr. Perfect. Make a decision now. Her outburst caught me off guard. I sat stunned and silent for what seemed like hours. She had walked away leaving me alone, even though I had only just regained consciousness. I rarely panic or act rashly. The thought of not seeing my children on a daily basis saddened me, but I hoped to save my family. I was prepared for the worst. I had a lawyer ready to fight for me, so I took action. As I stepped into my home from the garage, Hester exploded. She screamed, "You idiot. Your sensitive male ego was hurt. You embarrassed me in front of my coworkers, just like you did in front of our friends and neighbors that day." I approached my children and spoke to them briefly, assuring them of my undying love for them, even though we would no longer live together as of tomorrow. Elise understood the situation, as she knew people with divorced parents, but Nate seemed confused. We lived in a no-fault state, so the divorce proceedings didn't seem too complicated, and she was supposed to get primary custody of the kids, the house, child support, and some alimony, but she didn't, and she was vehemently opposed to it for reasons unfathomable and known only to her. Her attorney has used various tactics to prolong the proceedings, including insisting on meetings and even suggesting marriage counseling. What is going on? I love my children, but if I stay with you, they will only remember a bitter man. I explained myself in a therapy session, but it's you I love. Ray, are you fixated on one incident? I can't ignore the promises you've made. I didn't mean to. Really I didn't, but everyone has breaking points. The senator belongs to a faction, which means the opposition party would welcome any material that would tarnish his reputation. A year or so ago, after Hess's appointment, I formulated a backup plan. I approached the chairman of the opposition party, with the assistance of a well-connected attorney in the city, who was looking for any way that might jeopardize the prospect of the senator's re-election and the dream of the White House. My attorney kept me updated on the chairman's requests every month, and this month we were prepared to fulfill the chairman's wishes. I took a sealed plastic bag out of my briefcase and placed it on the conference table, and the president was clearly surprised to see the contents of the bag as he muttered, "Is that what I think it is?" Yes, they looked at the bag as if it contained rare gold bullion. He didn't reach out to touch it but continued to stare at the bag in amazement, muttering that the arrogant woman had gone upstairs to take a shower when she got home. I'm sure when you examine these you'll find 2 unique sets of DNA, which by the way is her toothbrush for DNA comparison. I noticed, though, that his expression conveyed an unstated question. Why? Because she wasn't smart enough to realize she shouldn't have messed with me. She arrogantly assumed that I would eventually forgive her, and now she's flaunting it in my face. To hell with her and his colleagues, I lamented. Your career is over, Thomas. Damn you, Norberto, you stupid woman. How did your feeble, incompetent husband manage to collect the documents of our weekend together? I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Her call caught me off guard. I used to be her clone. I basically revealed to her that I'd tapped her phone a few months ago. They hadn't even talked that way. She asked me, what did you do? 90 minutes later, when I called her back, I understood what she meant, but I felt so evil. I replied that I just ordered a pepperoni pizza and garlic bread. Why do you care what I eat? I don't know how you did it, but it seems that you exacted some sort of revenge on Senator Norberto, who threatened to rough me up because of something you did, and you can't seem to come to terms with the fact that what I did with Thomas had nothing to do with our relationship. And yes, about that, I started to say that Senator Norberto abruptly dropped out of the Senate race 8 months before the election, citing extreme mental exhaustion, and I hadn't looked at women with an appealing eye in months, until my daughter, who was a woman's best friend and a woman's best friend, said, I don't want to see women in the same way as I see them. Looked at a woman until my daughter asked about it. Dad, when are you going to start dating other women? Elise asked me cheerfully. My kids were with me the second weekend. Linda's mom really wants to go out with you. I was so stunned my jaw probably dropped open. I was in the middle of a divorce. Linda's mom mentioned it. Do you agree? Dad, I don't want you to be alone, but please Dad, not Marcy's mom, we don't even like her. Her kids are very perceptive. Dad, Linda's mom's been divorced from her for 5 years now. I didn't know that she'd be interested in me. When you're married you don't think about the possibility of other women. At least I didn't. I was naive. I was too naive. Eli was watching me closely from the shadows and I told her that, given the fact that I'd only recently resumed dating, I wasn't emotionally ready for something meaningful, and she laughed and reassured me that I didn't need to prove my innocence to every date. She also told me that I would attract the attention of other divorced mothers among my children's friends because I was a good father with a successful career and was not unattractive. I admitted to feeling lonely at times, but not enough to consider reconciling with her, and I refused to entertain the thought of her betraying me again, while Hester, on the other hand, was quick to dismiss her affair as a stupid mistake, and she vowed never to do that again. Her mouth opened and closed twice, and I could feel the urge to respond, but she remained speechless. I half expected her to stick around, even though she couldn't defend her point of view, especially considering that it seemed pointless to call Senator mother-in-law, she said, and he seemed to think that you had played a role in his decision to withdraw from the Senate race, and that she hadn't intervened enough. I raised an eyebrow and continued to keep my dinner on the down low, deciding not to comment. When I was married, I avoided Thursday nights out like the plague, but now that I'm single, I find myself going out a lot, and the 4 of us find a seat, order drinks, and soak up the atmosphere. She was wearing a silky blue shirt, slightly unbuttoned, and a short skirt underneath that accentuated her long muscular legs. Her friend seemed out of place in the bar. She was slightly older than her friend, perhaps in her early 40s, and exuded elegance and beauty in a sweater and skirt, obviously from an upscale store. Her long silvery blonde hair was shoulder length and her eyes were a darker color. An hour later, I decided to ask a blonde to dance, but as I walked up to her table, a brunette took me by the hand and led me to the dance floor. We danced to a few upbeat numbers until the dance slowed down and I was stunned and mesmerized when she kissed me passionately, We left the club together and went back to my place. We were very involved in bed, and that night she told me about her life. It turned out that she and a companion were celebrating her recent divorce. She was a great lover, and we dated for about a month before she expressed her reluctance to commit to me so soon after her divorce. I understood her point of view and we parted ways peacefully, but I hadn't had a chance to inquire about her since we first met, and this piqued my interest greatly. She walked into the room alone and all eyes were on her, her figure reminiscent of the stallion Megan, her long luxurious cascading brown hair cascading over her head and flowing over her shoulders. She walked over to me in her size 4 heels and sat down, and damn it, I was sure I'd ascended to heaven. I was frantically thinking, trying to come up with an amazing opening line, but before I could respond, she peered into my eyes and asked me what I wanted to drink. A few hours later, we left the house and went to her lovely apartment. She said she preferred to have sex in her own bed, which was common among women, and she discussed the psychology behind it, as she had the perfect physique and I was highly skeptical of her at 45. Maria admitted that she was dedicated to her work, didn't want children, and just enjoyed having flings with different men. I had genuine feelings for her and could have fallen in love, but since that wasn't an option for me, I agreed to be friends for the next year, and we saw each other once a month until Maria unexpectedly fell in love with a much younger man. My ex-mother-in-law would call me, and even though we were divorced we remained close, and I still call them mom and dad because of mutual understanding and grandchildren. She's a good person who divorced an abusive cheater a few years ago. I'm sure she hasn't dated anyone since her injury, and she needs a good man to prove that not all men are scoundrels. I'm sure you're a decent person, my ex-mother-in-law explains. Isn't it weird when your ex-mother-in-law tries to set you up on a date with her daughter? My ex-mother-in-law explains that isn't it weird when your ex-mother-in-law tries to set you up on a date with her? Just as importantly, she has a great personality. At the end of the night, I made it a point to get close to Cheryl and give her my full attention, just like I did with my ex-wife. We sat at a table with my in-laws. Mom was elegant as usual, but Dad was more restrained at first. I could understand his demeanor, but as the evening progressed he became more open. When I showed Sherry to the door, she kissed me gently on the lips and gave me her phone number. 3 days later, I called Sherry to ask her out. She agreed, and the following Friday we had a date at one of the best Italian restaurants in the city, followed by an art show at a nearby gallery. We spent precious time together, playing mini-golf, having a picnic at a nearby park, and overall, I think everything went well, especially the incredible friendship the two girls formed. But your son was in the principal's office today for a fight. His face is bruised and battered, he's in detention for 3 days, and all he can say is that it's all because of this girl named Monica, and I'll be coming over after dinner to take Nate out for some ice cream, and let's not jump to any conclusions until we get to the bottom of what's going on. I answered her calmly, and I heard her sigh before she hung up. He had a cut on his lip and a scratch on the left side of his face. You should see the other one, Dad, he joked. What about the truth? Nathan Abraham, I responded with his full name for seriousness. The boy who harassed Papa Mo was 2 years older than Nate. Would Papa Mo tell me the same story? I asked Dad with certainty that I wouldn't hit him unless he started it. She's really small, Dad. Nate has a point. She's Nate. You did the right thing, I replied, my voice filled with pride. Monique had inherited her mother's petite stature, which made her at least half a head shorter than most of her peers. Childhood innocence sometimes trumps the wisdom of experience. I applauded you for protecting Mo, but it was between us. I told him I would talk to the principal and see what could be done, and that you might want to update your mom on Mo's condition. The next day, I contacted the principal, and the school has a strict zero-tolerance policy for fights and assaults, whether or not students act in self-defense. As a result, after interviewing witnesses, the perpetrator was incarcerated for 6 days. Despite my disagreement with this policy, I advised him not to accept the punishment, and I assured him that I would support him and promised to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford a ring. Things get complicated when Hester finds out that Sherry is Mom's personal assistant and that Mom has arranged their first meeting. Mom, shouldn't you be on my side? Hester yells at her, and then Mom says, know your side, to which Mom responds, he's not coming back to you, you totally screwed up, why let a good man go to waste? She deserves someone like Reggie. Mom describes the screams Hester lets out as horrific in her recounting of the incident. Both of my children enjoy spending time with Sherry. My daughter in particular enjoys the way she takes care of me. Sherry's natural inclination to satisfy my desires and to make me feel like I'm my own master. This in turn encourages me to think of her as my queen. Elise seems to take pleasure in witnessing the affection between Sherry and I rivalry. The clerk of the court who officiated at the wedding was taken aback when my ex-mother-in-law stood before me as Sherry's maid of honor. When she inquired, I laughed and said, no one would have expected the Spanish Inquisition to be derived from the classic British comedy Monty Python's Flying Circus, but to be honest, no one would have anticipated the inquiries of the federal marshals either. It seems the authorities were upset about a certain former senator who was involved in a verbal altercation and subsequent injury in the restroom of an upscale Houston restaurant. I clarified to them that my alibi was that I was at home with my wife and 3 children, hundreds of miles away from the scene of the crime, and that I was very sorry for what had happened to the senator, and I meant it, and that no one deserved to be more sorry than I. If I had any intentions, I would have acted on them, I retorted cynically. The torture by federal agents was only the beginning, however, and a week later, a reporter from the Associated Press came to my office seeking details about the aforementioned incident. The senator allegedly had affairs with 26 women while in office, and at this juncture, many knew of Hester's affair with the senator, even though I had not publicized it for many years. When news of the senator's misbehavior broke, I couldn't help but question her self-esteem. When news of the senator's misbehavior broke, I couldn't help but question her. I couldn't help but wonder about her self-esteem. When news of the senator's misbehavior broke, I couldn't help but wonder about her self-esteem. When news of the senator's misbehavior broke, I couldn't help but wonder about her self-esteem. When news of the senator's misbehavior broke, I wouldn't have made it up just to save you the embarrassment of the situation. I'm not promiscuous, she yelled at me before I ended the call. I have to admit I laughed. I even thought about going on a long vacation out of town. When the news broke, Sherry advised me to give up on the idea, not to confront her, just tell the truth. She cheated on me, you divorce her and move on with your life. I also sympathize very much with my ex-mother-in-law, who was a good friend of ours. I also have a lot of sympathy for my in-laws. They became good friends of ours after the article was published, and we invited them to stay with us for a couple of weeks in a house we bought. During that time they mostly stayed at home and avoided answering the phone. My kids started spending more time at home with Cherry Moore and me. It wasn't anything official, but our house naturally became a gathering place for the neighborhood kids. At first they would complain, but I'm sure things would settle down. I think when the kids were with me we rarely discussed Hester. Even though she was still their mom, she had become the ex in my life, and they avoided mentioning her out of consideration for Sherry, who they naturally referred to as their mom, just as Mo did initially. I sensed that Hester's parents were upset when the kids started referring to Sherry as mom, but it quickly dissipated because they had been close to Sherry even before we were married. But when Ellie announced the news of her mother's engagement one afternoon, my feelings hit rock bottom and a wave of sadness came over me. What I might have had, and then I felt a comforting embrace surround me, and my sadness quickly transformed into joy at what I now had.